Joe McCafferty is an architect and director of housing specialist Levitt Bernstein. She's also chair of the NLA Expert Panel on housing. She designs housing of all scales, sits on a lot of design review panels across London, and is co-author of the Housing Design Handbook. So, Joe, can you tell me about some of the projects the practice is working on at the moment?
Thank you, Peter. Well, interestingly, we're working on, as we always try to, lots of small projects, but also some very substantial ones in parallel. So this morning, I've just come from a design review panel on one of our biggest projects for Islington. We're doing a lot of work for Islington at the moment for the local authority, which is really interesting, all housing projects. And this one is in Archway. And it's a project that's delivering a medical centre for the local community and a new library with new housing over the top. And it's one of their first net zero carbon pilot projects, Peter. So it's extraordinary, sort of that mix, and doing it that in my locality. It's my neighbourhood too. So it's a really interesting project for Islington. And we really feel they're pushing housing quality and have done for a long time. So we're really enjoying that. But in parallel, I'm working on a very big master planning project in Poplar, which has involved it's a very big estate regeneration project that I've been involved with over the last 12 years. And it's the next part of that that's combining two existing estates together. And we've done all the consultation process through COVID. So that's been fascinating, and it's gone to ballot, over 90% turnout and 90% in favour. So continuing on that project's really, really exciting, shaping a new neighbourhood in London with an existing community. So those two things in parallel are kind of taking most of my time at the moment.
So what impact is the pandemic having on your design thinking? Everyone's talking about more home working and so on, but there are other impacts as well, I guess.
There are, Peter. I think if I'm really deeply honest about it, I think actually what it's doing is making it clearer to us the sort of value in good housing. And actually those principles of good housing, which often comes down to the detail, as we all know, and the importance of campaigning for good housing. And so it's brought us back to the very fundamentals of the work that we do, and campaigning for those very important issues of space, both internally and externally, natural ventilation, light, flexibility in housing, which I know a lot of people have talked about a lot over the years, but it's very, very hard in the modern world to secure flexibility in housing, flexibility in tenure, flexibility in household size and use and configuration. So all of those things we've known since we were founded and since I started working in housing are important, but they're just more important now than ever to campaign for and make happen in projects and make real in projects. So I think that's my answer, Peter.
In terms of delivering high quality housing and the sort of numbers we need, what do you see as the big concerns in London, and also what are sort of positives?
I think one of the biggest concerns that we've experienced over the last year is, and beyond, but particularly at the moment because of COVID, is just how stretched local authorities are in skills and resource to really both not only develop their own projects and do that at pace, but also and take the communities in which they're working with them, but also for the planning departments and the individual departments with whom we liaise through developing designs, their resource to secure approvals and just move projects on. I think they are so stretched at the moment working in the communities that they work in and support on all fronts. I think actually just progressing those schemes at the pace that we need them to progress is very, very, very tough. And it's not to say they're not trying. I mean, we are having, as I said this morning, we had a digital DRP. We're our schemes are going to planning committee, it's not as if that has slowed. Everyone is doing their very best, but I think actually just the day-to-day struggle of moving projects on is quite tough at the moment. The positives, I would say, some of the things that are happening, which I'm finding really exhilarating and hopeful in terms of the quality of housing that's being delivered in London, come down to actually the approach towards net zero carbon. And our discussion around that in the last 12 months has dramatically changed. We're working on 6 passive house projects now, Peter, in parallel for different local authorities. And I think that also in terms of how you design to those standards actually means that you're securing detail, material specification and quality much earlier in the process than we ever have been able to before. So even though perhaps those projects might be taking slightly longer because you need much more technical support and advice and you go into much more technical detail before putting in a planning application, particularly with regard to things like embodied carbon. So you're really, really scrutinizing the weight of a building, its material specification. We're even looking at the weight of concrete, the amount of reinforcement, all pre-planning. Actually, it's the right way to approach a project. It's much more holistic and there's much more detail. And I think that actually that therefore will hopefully give our clients more cost certainty post-planning, and therefore secure the quality of those projects through the build process. So I think there are real positives there, not only for the planet, but also in terms of the quality of our housing.
You talk about engaging with the communities, and I guess in the sort of work you do, you've actually been doing that for a long time, long before we had ballots and so on like that. And the government is now proposing much more digital engagement. How do you actually get local communities on side for delivering new projects like you have been at Poplar?
Well, I think, Peter, what I would say, a lot of it isn't necessarily rocket science. It just doesn't happen enough. But I think what we have realised through the Poplar project, probably most, is that actually at this moment in time and over the last year, because of the circumstances we all find ourselves in, actually making sure that we're communicating using traditional methods, hard copy, things sent through the post, phoning people, making sure those channels of communication are open and active. Alongside all the digital exhibitions, digital webinars. We did before the ballot on Aberfeldy, we did an amazing Planning for Real exercise that was led by the Housing Association, Poplar Harker we were working with, where we posted out these hard copy packs that families then and residents then completed themselves, and they filmed themselves completing those and then uploaded those on WhatsApp. And we've had loads of amazing sort of insight into family and household discussions around the design because of that. So I think mixing the old school methods with actually the digital has meant a greater democracy in terms of us having a greater conversation or more detailed conversation with more people. So again, that's been a very big positive, whereas I think at the beginning everyone was very nervous about, will the engagement be meaningful? Will we have meaningful feedback? The other thing I would say that's been a real kind of wonderful moment in that particular project, we've been working with Diana Bornat from ZCD Architects on the youth engagement side. And that's been actually quite physical. We've gone out to see sites before lockdown, all face masked up. We've had design sessions in schools. And that has cast a really important lens on how we're designing for children and young people. And I think if there's another lesson that comes out of lockdown is we need to do this properly. And I think we need to put young people at the heart of the design of the built environment like never before.
Well, one of your past projects, Vaudeville Court in Islington, is a sort of model small site project. And the ability to deliver small sites was a bone of contention between the Mayor and MHCLG over the London plan. So why is it that small sites are so difficult to deliver in London? What do you think we can do about it to speed it up?
I think, Peter, in terms of why they're so difficult, and often that's why they're so interesting to architects, is that there are so many design challenges, and often small sites, almost always small sites, require a bespoke design solution to really maximize the opportunity of that site can offer in all sorts of respects. So often there are difficult constraints in terms of underground servicing. There's in existing services, often those sites have difficult topography. They often are overlooked or have adjoining conditions with other dwellings, so there might be rights of light constraints too. So I think to unlock those sites, you really need to look at every single millimeter, and that takes time, and that needs sort of acknowledgement. It does take time. I think the planning processes often are quite difficult with projects like that too, and also often those sites are very overlooked and very sort of a real focus for local communities. So what I think needs to happen better to unlock small sites, first of all, much better engagement with local communities early on to find out really what the constraints and issues are from their perspective, but also what's missing in that local community and whether those projects can help deliver some of those things. And that can be physical in terms of space and amenity, or that can be much more to do with social value. If you work more closely with communities on smaller site development, the results can be much better and not necessarily faster, Peter, but certainly better. I mean, I think, and achieve less opposition. The other thing that I've talked about in the past, and I know Claire Benny has too, this issue of actually Section 106 for smaller sites being much more finely attributed to kind of the immediate condition of those sites and their immediate community. And if those Section 106 contributions can be seen much more as a social contract with the local community and designated and identified for local benefit, then also I think those things would, those projects would achieve a much better outcome for the local community and be less opposed. And finally, I think somehow the planning system needs to find a way of looking at small sites that are geographically quite close together as single applications and not individual planning applications. And I think that would also, it would minimize the amount of expenditure, maximize the benefit in terms of development, and probably make more sense in terms of Section 106 and contributions for the local area and the local benefit. Somehow that must be possible. So that would be my answer to that, Peter.
So do you think the idea of having design codes will actually make that easier? And is that a good thing, or do you not really approve of codes?
Good question, Peter. I have to say, with regard to small sites, and as you know, through the housing panel, we've looked at the housing SBG in a lot of detail, and obviously Module D of that proposes design codes. But I find it peculiar that one might have a design code for small sites where very bespoke architectural solutions are required and not for larger sites. So I have to say, I don't think it's going to unlock small site delivery.
Well, that's a very interesting point. So thank you very much, Jo, for your insights. And also thank you very much for the hard work you do on the NLA Expert Panel on Housing. And I thought your response to the SPG consultation was a really first-class piece of work. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. Stay well. A pleasure.